Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's really important discussion on the health and future of Biscayne Bay. I'm Mike Heithouse, Dean of the College of Arts, Sciences, and Education at Florida International University. Before we get started, a couple quick housekeeping things. If you'd like to ask questions, and we hope you have a lot, please use the Q&A function. We actually have a whole team behind the scenes that will be answering your questions as they go along, and we'll be answering as many as we can live throughout the presentation. Before we get to our panel of experts, I'd like to turn it over to FIU's fifth president, Mark B. Rosenberg, for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Dean, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. If the poet T.S. Eliot were alive today, we would be reminded that humankind cannot bear very much reality. Indeed, we awaken this morning to a lot of reality. Part of our Biscayne Bay is filling with algae. Where did this algae come from? Why did this happen? What can be done? Will Miami-Dade County become a global poster child once again for Paradise Lost? Because we failed this time to heed the countless warnings of our scientists, and we lost our Biscayne Bay. Make no mistake, we have a serious financial and economic challenge on our hands with the Bay situation, accompanied by a near business as usual approach by some in this community who disregard the science. The Miami-Dade County Grand Jury in the fall of 2018 warned us about this situation. And the new Biscayne Bay Task Force report, A Unified Approach for a Healthy and Resilient Biscayne Bay, points not only to the challenges, but points to solutions. While there are a multiple of reasons for our inability to protect our bay, suffice it to say that our rising seawater levels and rising groundwater levels guarantee contamination from sewage drain fields in our community that are too shallow. Of course, periodic water and sewage line failures throughout the community are well known, but at times ignored. The community's antiquated sewer system has ruptured at random throughout the last 2 decades, pouring millions of gallons of treated and untreated sewage into our Biscayne aquifer. Single-use plastics and litter more generally are taking their tolls as well. At least 2/3 of the world's fish stocks are suffering from plastic ingestion, and thousands of marine animals die annually from plastic entanglement. And what about all of our canals pumping water into the bay? And finally, excessive nutrients are further endangering the bay's fragile ecosystem. It's estimated that nearly 2,200 tons of nutrients annually empty into Biscayne Bay from Miami-Dade's canal system. The nutrient loading includes stormwater runoff, agriculture and energy byproducts from the western and southern parts of Miami-Dade County, and leakage from septic and sewage system. The end result, and you're going to hear about this, is that our bay seagrass is disappearing. And this morning, we awaken with a lot of reality. Our living nightmare is here and now. Because yesterday, streaks of green and brown algae were spotted floating on the water and flowing out of the canals into the bay and around the bay and around into Bay Harbor Island and into North Bay Village. And we have been warned not to come into contact with algae and to stay away from our bay. Is this algae toxic? Is there a link with the thousands of dead fish seen floating throughout several locations earlier in the week? These developments they must further galvanize us to put the pedal to the metal and get going with cleaning up our bay and mediating the causes of the pollution. So I'm grateful to our panelists and attendees for joining us today. Biscayne Bay is one of the jewels of our community. It's a globally known and recognized asset. We simply cannot watch it deteriorate before our eyes. So I want to thank Dean Michael Heithouse and our very capable team of specialists from FIU who will be introduced by Dean Heithaus. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. And it's my pleasure to introduce a really outstanding panel. Each one of our panelists is going to give us about 3 to 5 minutes of remarks. But first, I'd like to introduce all of them. First, we have Dr. Jim Forkran, who is the director of our Coastlines and Oceans Division in FIU's Institute of Environment. Jim is a world-renowned expert on seagrass, as well as on marine and estuarine ecosystems. He's been at FIU for more than 25 years and has been working on local ecosystems and trying to figure out how to address general questions in ecology that matter for people and ecosystems. And he's been working around the world for the last 10 years, helping translate the science of carbon dynamics and how important seagrasses and mangroves are for addressing issues of climate change. He's one of the lead scientists, in fact, in the International Blue Carbon Working Group and is a scientific representative to the International Blue Carbon Policy Working Group. And he's going to tell us about the role of seagrasses and their die-off and the effect that has on the bay, how it's happened, and what we might be able to do to fix it. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Piero Gardinelli, who's the Associate Director of FIU's Institute of Environment and the Director of our Freshwater Resources Division. He's an expert in the fields of environmental chemistry, chemical oceanography, and water quality monitoring. He specializes in detecting pollutants and contaminants in a lot of our South Florida waterways. And he's going to be talking to us about the sampling and data that's been collected over the last weeks. We're going to hear about the equipment that's being used to collect the data and really dive into what might be contributing to these fish kills. Next, we'll hear from Ike Onuka. Ike is in the Department of Earth and Environment. He's a PhD student in our Center for Aquatic Chemistry and Environment, and his research is incredibly important. He's investigating the relationship between water flow and what's in the water, especially in those drainage canals. And his work is really focused on developing ways to measure the nutrients and the contaminants that are getting into the water so we can predict what's going to happen before it happens and take action. And he's going to be telling us about a lot of the efforts over the last couple of days to really understand what's been going on in the bay. Then finally, we're going to hear from Dr. Tiffany Troxler, who's the Director of Science for our Sea Level Solutions Center in the Institute of Environment. Tiffany's a wetland ecosystems ecologist. She studies water quality and ecosystem responses to environmental change. But she's also really working hard for that research to inform management and restoration of coastal and freshwater wetlands and estuaries here in South Florida and around the world. She's been a big player in the Biscayne Bay Marine Health Summits that FIU's hosted in 2017 and 2019, and is one of 9 experts that was chosen by Miami-Dade County to sit on the Biscayne Bay Task Force. She's going to talk a lot more about the work of the task force, including its recent report, and is also going to be talking about some of the solutions that we have for the bay's health issues and what we can do in the future. So we're looking forward to a really outstanding set of quick presentations and answering all the questions you have. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Forkran.
Thank you, Dean Heithaus. I have a tremendous amount of material to cover in 3 minutes. So because of that, I hope that I really am just going to set the stage for the questions that everyone out there wants to have answered later in the program. So Biscayne Bay is this beautiful place. It's still a beautiful place despite its problems. And we hope that we can return that brilliance that people first saw when they got here, both Native Americans and then descendants of Europeans. When they first arrived in Biscayne Bay, it was a beautiful blue bay that was carpeted on the bottom with turtle grass. So clear water, and in that turtle grass were the conch and the lobster and the snapper and the animals that were being harvested for food by everybody who's ever lived next to the bay. It is a seagrass dominated bay, and especially that turtlegrass dominated bay, because very little nutrient gets put into it. So a little bit of nitrogen, a little bit of phosphorus actually can flow across our landscape and enter our nearshore waters in the native state. That original Biscayne Bay also didn't have polygonal islands in the middle of it, like Brickell Key. You know, we did a lot of dredging of Biscayne Bay in filling and creating islands and building causeways, and doing that also exacerbated the problems that were going to come by changing water flow and the way the water exchanges in and out of Biscayne Bay. So those seagrasses said they were really important. Habitat, really important for food, also really important for keeping the water clear. When the wind blows hard over seagrass, some of the seagrass leaves get ripped up and they end up on land, but the water above them stays real clear. If you lose the seagrasses, any kind of wind event stirs up muck and it can be there forever. Another interesting component of the original Biscayne Bay before we built this megalopolis around it is there were freshwater springs coming out of the bottom of the bay that sailors could sail up to, drop kegs in the water, and pull fresh, clean, low nutrient, no salinity water out of those bubbling springs in the bay. But the building of all of the buildings that support the 1.5 million people that live in Miami-Dade County and the flood control, the canals that we've built and draining the land has really curtailed that amount of that freshwater flow, and they've also changed the quality. So seagrasses dominate here because low nutrients. What humans have done is we've increased the concentration of phosphorus in the groundwater, in the canals, on the land that contributes to discharges directly into Biscayne Bay. And when you take nutrients and put them into a community like turtlegrass that just loves low nutrient environments, what you do is you change the competitive balance. So all of a sudden, turtlegrass is no longer the king of the hill. Faster growing things are. So the first thing we see is we change from turtlegrass to shoalweed, and then you put more nutrients in, it changes from shoalweed to seaweeds, and more nutrients. It goes from seaweeds to the fastest growing of all marine things, and those are those microplankton that make up algae blooms. So we've been watching a slow change for at least throughout the entire 20th century of the increase of phosphorus in Biscayne Bay. The increase in phosphorus has led to a decrease in water clarity, and it all along the bay from Oleta River State Park all the way down to Homestead, there's a very narrow band around the shoreline where our polluted groundwater is coming out now that we've lost most of the seagrasses there, and those areas are now covered with seaweeds. But what's happened is, and it's been especially obvious since about 2010, is that slow buildup of phosphorus in the system, combined with the really restricted circulation that we've caused by our causeways and our islands, that phosphorus has built up, and we're losing seagrasses en masse. The seagrasses in the northern part of Biscayne Bay over the last decade have retreated from 10 feet deep where light could reach, and as the water became more turbid, they retreated into shallower water. Eventually, there was not enough light even in the shallowest water, so now our seagrasses are retreating from the north to the south. I don't know how many of you have looked in the Julia Tuttle Basin north of the Causeway. We've lost them all, and that's going to continue to march south unless we do something about these phosphorus inputs. So we've got a system that we've perturbed, we've changed, and we want to get it back to the way it once was. Now are these plankton blooms. I think our next speakers are going to talk about what's really going on right now that's brought this to a head, as President Rosenberg brought up. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Jim. Dr. Gardinali, you've been out there measuring the water quality that links to these nutrients for the last few weeks, and actually for a lot longer than that. Can you fill us in on what you've been doing?
Sure. Thank you, Dean Heinhaus. I want to have a conversation of how did we see what was going on and give an idea of the response. So, but before I go there, I just want to say that, for all of us, oxygen is vital, right? Everybody understands that, oxygen is the base of living things. So depriving a body of water of oxygen cannot result in anything good. And I think that's what happened this time, or that was the beginning of the problem that we saw. The first reports came to us through stakeholders and collaborators of fish kills on the eastern side of the bay in a few parks that people actually go to the shore, so they interact with the shore. So this was one of the fish kills that was much larger in the magnitude than things that we had before. And then, of course, in areas where the circulation is usually compromised, which is the middle of Biscayne Bay, in which we really have only two outlets, the Howlover outlet up north, and then Governor's Cod, or Government Cod on the south. So a combination of higher temperatures and bad circulation, and that will decrease the concentration of oxygen in the water rather quickly. So once we had the initial reports of the fish kills, we tried to deploy most of the resources that FIU has in a number of different options. So the typical response will be to send crews with boats, and Ike will talk about that later on, with instruments that measure water quality in situ. And again, that's usually a very challenging, very labor-intensive operation. So we did two things. What you're seeing in this picture is an autonomous vehicle that you can actually program to do surveys in whatever area you want. So there's a vessel that tends to it. We keep an eye on where this vehicle is. And it does have water quality sensors, specific oxygen sensors on board. And we can do other things like bathymetry. And so we deployed so we can cover rather larger areas. The initial day that we went out there, the areas of low oxygen were kind of massive. So it wasn't a very localized area on the eastern shore. It went, sorry, on the western shore. It went all the way to Normandy Isle. So because of that, we decided to put additional tools, and this one was one of them. If we can go to the next slide, I can give you another example. Of course, the first challenge that we were facing is, well, how we're going to monitor this thing at night. And again, night presents another problem, and the processes in the environment don't stop because, we go to sleep. So the other option that we had, and we had several of these instrumented buoys in locations in Biscayne Bay. We have had them there to understand the baseline of the bay on normal conditions, and then use them to figure out when an abnormal condition kicks in. These buoys transmit the data over a cell phone signal. So we actually see it in real time with data streams that go every 15 minutes. So we did place one of these buoys in an area of low oxygen to see how things will progress. And I'm happy to say that everybody did log in and look at this data online. So there were people were asking a lot of questions. Why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing that? So again, this was something that we did, in the open, so all the agencies and all the stakeholders could actually see what was going on and ask us questions about it. And then came, of course, the surface of the water is always in contact with the atmosphere. So you will imagine that eventually you will put enough oxygen on the top of the water column. So the next question was when, what happened at depth? And again, most of the fish that people were reporting in the fish kill were puffer fish, which are usually living at the bottom of the water column. So the other effort that we did was to start collecting depth profiles to understand how the oxygen was distributed in the bay. And if we can go to the next slide, this will be one example. This device, it's completely autonomous. It doesn't have to float. It will be deployed in a point, and it will actually follow a particular navigation pathway, but it will go up and down the water column, so we can have an idea if the low oxygen is in the surface, is at the bottom, or it's similar along the water column. Now, the good thing is that by being there every day, by collecting as much data as we can, we did see large areas of the bay recover. The oxygen levels in the main open areas of the bay came back up. But it also was the data that was used to deploy aerators of all kinds of different kinds. And you may have seen the fireboat with hoses. There's another vessel that cities have called the Scavenger 2000 that oxygenates the water. You may have seen water pumps deployed in the shoreline to aerate the water. And again, follow-up measurements that we did in a few days later showed that some of those efforts did improve the oxygen in the water. We still have a few areas where we need to keep looking at, but that's the whole story. Deprivation of oxygen initiated this, and then what we have to keep an eye on is that it will trigger other problems that we are seeing as the algal blooms and so on. So with that, I think I'm gonna pass to Ike so he can tell the story.
Great. Well, thank you, Piero. And I mean, as you heard, having these sensors out there, getting these tremendous amounts of data throughout the bay is really critical for not just figuring out what's going on, but to be able to get the responses done. And a lot of this takes tons of person hours out on the bay. And a lot of our graduate students, like Ike Anwuka, has been out there, and he can tell you what it's like out on the bay and show you some of the data that they've collected. So Ike, take it away.
Thank you very much for this opportunity and for having me. So this on last Saturday, me and my colleague Cody, we went out to sample the bay and to record some of the water quality parameters and to figure out what was going on in the bay. And so what happened was we discovered that there were bands of low oxygen and high oxygens all around. And then towards the inlets, there was very low oxygen. And so we noticed this. And also, we were fortunate to see an aerator. So there was an aerator on the water trying to aerate the water. And we tested after they had left the area, and we found out that the dissolved oxygen improved slightly. It wasn't that good, but it was better than other places that were not aerated. And so we're able to really get a sense of what was going on in terms of oxygen distribution. At one point, we decided to take some depth profiles to see how the dissolved oxygen was distributed, from the surface to the depth. And even in places where the oxygen was rich, we still discovered that with depth, there was a tremendous decrease in the amount of dissolved oxygen. And so and some of the depths were not even that deep. On average, it was about 1.8 meters, but there was a gradient in dissolved oxygen with depth. And so this actually speaks to the strength of FIU and INWI and Institute of Environment, and the CREST program, because we were able to have equipment, have sensors to be able to capture these things in real time as they were occurring. And this was great because now we can be able to put the data together and determine, okay, what's going on. Now, to be able to fully comprehend what exactly is going on, we need to also incorporate measurement of nutrients, as some of our experts have talked about, especially the nutrients that are coming from the canals, because these canals are the entry points to the bay, and they are terrestrial. They convey whatever is being exported from the watershed, from agriculture, and from urban places. And so we really need to understand where these nutrients are coming from and what their effects are on, the bay. And so in addition to have this water quality monitoring, intensive water quality monitoring in terms of temporal frequency, we need to be able to monitor nutrients as well. Now, currently, the frequency at which nutrients are being monitored is very coarse. So in between bi-weekly to monthly. And in that case, you tend to miss important events that may be leading to some of these environmental consequences. So we need to be able to monitor with high temporal resolution nutrients, especially phosphorus, so that we can get a better picture of how all these environmental factors operate to cause the low dissolved oxygen, harmful algal blooms, eutrophication, nutrient enrichment, and all the other coastal pollution problems that we have. And one of the ways that this can happen is the use of high velocity velocimetric instruments, so acoustic sensors and optical sensors. So one of the problems with nutrient monitoring in a high temporal resolution is cost, and it's very intensive. So one of the ways that we can combat this is by having proxies or surrogate measurements. So parameters like flow, so flow rate, flow velocity, suspended solids, which are easier to monitor, can be used via intensive calibrations that can be used as proxies for nutrients, especially phosphorus. And so this is one way we can develop a comprehensive monitoring framework where we're able to use these sensors to get real-time, high temporal resolution data on nutrients that can give us a complete picture of what's really going on. Because right now we just know bits and pieces, but now we have the opportunity to add on what we have, and so we can generate more knowledge of what's going on. And this will help us to develop relationships and to create models that can help us to predict that, oh, the conditions right now are favorable for, let's say, a bloom or eutrophication or even low DO. How can we mitigate against it? And so I think this is the next phase we need to enter to so that we can contain this problem.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's exactly right. You need those data to be able to make the decisions that need to be made to protect the bay. And Dr. Troxler, can you tell us a bit more about how that's integrated and what the future looks like?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't bring my crystal ball, but I will talk about some of the things that are going on and the work of the task force. And thanks everyone for joining us today. So yeah, Miami-Dade County has been monitoring water quality, but for the last 40 years, so that we do have a pretty robust water quality monitoring program. But as EK mentioned, sometimes we don't have the appropriate spatial or temporal resolution in order to detect the types of events that we've seen over the last 2 weeks. And there, we've also, over the years, Miami-Dade County has restored significant areas of mangrove wetland habitat around Biscayne Bay. You heard from Dr. Forkran, who said we've had a lot of development and loss of habitat as a result of our increasing population, now nearly 3 million people in Miami-Dade County. So there are a number of activities that have been going on, over the last decades. It just hasn't been enough in order to keep up with the pace of development and the pace of population increase around Biscayne Bay. And as you heard earlier, it responds very significantly to very small inputs of nutrients. So it really requires a very robust resource management plan, a watershed management plan, in order to be able to balance the development and population on our shores with the health of Biscayne Bay. And Miami-Dade County has also released a couple of reports. President Rosenberg mentioned the seagrass report on describing some of the seagrass loss that we've seen over time in areas from the northern part of the bay down to the south. And also another report trying to get a better handle on the vulnerability of septic systems, particularly in the context of changing sea level and how that influences groundwater levels and how that in turn influences how well septic systems are able to work, which is another really important infrastructure issue that you'll be hearing more about as the Biscayne Bay Task Force report is released, and the county also has a report that we'll be seeing soon on septic systems. But let me just briefly get back to the Biscayne Bay Task Force. So in February 2019, there was a resolution adopted by the Board of County Commissioners to establish a Biscayne Bay Task Force. We began the work in June and worked over a year to develop or to develop the material, to hear the material, to incorporate the material that gives us a better understanding of exactly what we need to be doing around Biscayne Bay and in the watershed of Biscayne Bay to help recover its health. There were over 18 meetings. We heard 35 presentations from universities, agencies, NGOs, the public, and pulled all of that information together into the Biscayne Bay Task Force report. And that report is now on its way to the mayor's office and will show up as at some point as an agenda item on the county commission for a county commission meeting to be considered by our commissioners. And so in that report, there are a number of there are a couple of overarching recommendations, and then a number of from specific to more general recommendations that we can talk about at a later time. But really, it's a comprehensive approach. It's addressing water quality, governance, infrastructure, watershed habitat restoration and natural infrastructure, marine debris, education and outreach, and funding. And so just briefly, some of those overarching recommendations are to, in fact, we recommended to establish a watershed management board so that we can have more oversight as to the health of Biscayne Bay and to use science in order to help to recover it. To have a chief bay officer that would help liaison between the watershed management board and the county to help move that work forward, and then to establish a watershed restoration plan that the watershed management board can use to work toward the recovery of Biscayne Bay. And that information will be out soon in its final form. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to all the panelists. And we have a lot of questions coming in and hundreds of people participating. So I think it shows how important this issue is and how much interest there is. So because we have so many questions, I'm going to ask our panelists to try and keep our answers really short so we can get through as many questions live as we possibly can. I'll throw the first one to Dr. Forkran. And there's real interest in what is the rank order of threats to the Bay? I mean, we know that there are lots of challenges, but if you had to put them in order, what would that look like with some particular interest in where fertilizers fit into that mix?
Sure. This, of course, is a pretty difficult question to answer, Mike, because we've got such a huge area with different land uses in different places. but I've been thinking here for a few minutes about how to rank them relatively. I say our number one issue is water quality and how that water quality is affected by nutrient runoff. Most of the changes we're seeing, from the algae blooms to the seagrass losses, are being driven by phosphorus that's getting into the system now that wasn't getting into it before.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to jump in there. When we talk phosphorus, what's in that phosphorus? Where is it from? I mean, parts fertilizers, but that's not the only part, right?
No, exactly not. So that water quality is being impacted by Lake Okeechobee and the water that comes into canals. Phosphorus is coming into the system through our septic tanks. It's getting put in the system by fertilizer on our lawns and by fertilizer in our agricultural areas. You name it. I mean, we're bringing phosphorus here. We're putting it in the water, and it's getting into the bay where it wasn't before. To rank those, I would say, so there are over 150,000 septic tanks still in Dade County with a population density of 3 million people. I live 400 meters from Biscayne Bay, and my house is on a septic tank. It doesn't take very long for phosphorus that I put down my drains to go 400 yards and end up affecting Biscayne Bay. So water quality is that biggest one. Another big problem that we have is the cutoff of the freshwater supply that maintained that estuarine character of Biscayne Bay. So we've cut down the amount of water, but we've also polluted that water. And that water in the canals is really the same as the water that's in our groundwater. Those two things are connected, and they all flow to the coast. Sea level rise is a big threat. Especially because we've built now all around the coast, so there's no room for the mangroves to retreat. There's no room for the seagrasses to retreat up slope. Marine debris is a big issue. Overfishing, poisons and toxins coming out of some of our more industrial areas. All of those things are important, but I think all of them pale in importance compared to the nutrients that we're putting into the system. And I'm going to try to keep talking for just 1 minute. This is not an impossible problem. Tampa Bay saw this coming in 1970. They lost all of the seagrasses across Tampa Bay. They knew that it was nutrients. There was a regional pact put together, a watershed management plan. They cut down, in that case was nitrogen. They cut down on nitrogen loading into Tampa Bay, and they continued to work on it. Even though they did not see a response right away, after 20 years, the bay still didn't look all that better. But it took about 40 years. And at 40 years, they finally hit that restoration target, and they have more seagrasses now than they had in the 1970s. We can do this, right? We don't have to just keep letting it go downhill. There are actions we can take. We know what needs to be done. Now we have to figure out how to do it.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to jump ahead in some questions. And Dr. Troxler, we heard 40 years for Tampa Bay. I mean, do you have any thoughts, if we get the right policies in place, how long would it take to maybe hit certain benchmarks for quality in the bay? How long would it take to get it back?
Again, you're making me use that crystal ball.
Yep. Hey, you mentioned it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to agree with Dr. Forker, and it's going to take some time. So we have to stick with it, and we have to be comprehensive in our approach, and everyone has a role to play, being more conscientious about what we're putting down our drains, how we're applying. Okay. Deciding that we want to put a little bit more money down to retrofit some of our infrastructure. Number of things. Okay. And the more we do, the faster it'll happen.
Great. And so I guess one question with that is, Dr. Gardinale, if you could kind of follow on from that. I mean, do we have needs for new state water quality standards, or is it more about the actions that we take? What are some actions you think people or local governments could take? Because we have lots of questions about what can I do as a person? What can I do as an elected official? What does that suite look like to you to help with that water chemistry?
So let me throw a couple of points there. So water treatment, it's good in removing these nutrients, all right? Septics, they may have been good when they were installed, but they aged, right? And again, I'm in the same boat as Dr. Forker, and I live close to the bay. I am exactly 2,500 feet from a sewage line, and I still, as a user, don't know how I can push things to get connected to it. So I think collectively, we could make that push. We could ask to be connected to these sewer lines and remove at least that source. The other one that is easy for people to do is fertilizers. They could support fertilizer ordinances. Every time they come to a city, a municipality with an ordinance, it's for a good reason. So we should not oppose that. We should embrace them because it's gonna help us get there. And again, people, experts in grass will tell you that we don't need that much fertilizers in the rainy season in Florida. So just let your grass do what it does and it's still gonna be green for you. No need for that. So those two things, I think they're important for us. Investing in infrastructure to control runoff, street runoff and storm runoff and to clean it before it gets places. It's also something that it's important.
Great, thank you. And IK, you've been out there, you've been sampling, you saw on that map pockets with almost no oxygen, some with more. Could you kind of just help draw the links between nutrients, low oxygen, and the fish kills? And was that just concentrated in those areas where you saw very little oxygen?
Okay, so like I said before, to be able to really understand what's going on, we need to have all the parameters being measured. So when we went out, what we're really looking at was the oxygen. We didn't have any measurements of nutrients, and so, but like I said, we found them in pockets. So we had bands of low oxygen and high oxygen, and that could be due to the currents, right? So I'm talking about flows, how this system's how does the water interact with the constituent? How is the currents moving? Until we can have adequate measurements of all these parameters, then we can be able to understand fully the mechanisms by which this things happen. So we can be able to say that, oh, okay, we're having a low DO event, and then we have our measurements of flow, we have the nutrients, we have the turbidity, we have the chlorophyll. And so we can put all these things together and create models, mathematical equations to say that, okay, probably this is the source, probably this is the nutrient or the turbidity or the chlorophyll that's causing this. And so we really need to be able to form these relationships between the water quality and the water quantity, the water flow, to get a better sense of it.
Excellent, thank you. And so just kind of following on from that and kind of the interactions going on, we're hearing a lot of questions about the algae and the seagrass. So back to you, Jim. Can you really kind of take us through the different kinds of algae, what impacts they really have on the bay, and then tie that back to the seagrass, because you just mentioned it's gone in a lot of areas. How do we get it back, or can we get it back? So algae, then return of seagrass.
And you've given me an hour?
4.5 minutes. No.
So this DO problem is linked to the nutrient problem. What's happening is when we put nutrients into the bay, nutrients build biomass. So we get lots more living stuff. And as Dr. Gardinali said earlier, living stuff uses oxygen. So the nutrients themselves cause the growth of usually really small things that grow really fast, like plankton and algae that grows as a slime on the bottom. So we build up a lot of that biomass, and then at night, where they stop photosynthesizing, everything's respiring, they use up all that oxygen. And there's another thing that's, I think, was really important in kicking off this latest low DO problem that killed all the fish. It's been really hot, and the bay's kind of salty, and hot water holds way less oxygen than cooler water. And with global climate change and sea level rise and sea temperature rise, we're likely to see more and more fish kills as we continue to fertilize, building all that biomass, these microalgae that use all the oxygen at night, because as it gets warmer, the water will have less oxygen in it to last throughout the night. So if we want to get those seagrasses back, we need to cut down on the rate at which we're putting phosphorus into the system. We also probably will need to do things to manage the resuspension of the mud that's on the bottom that blocks light out from reaching. And these seagrasses need lots of light. We're talking 15, 20% of the sun's light reaching the bottom in order for them to survive. So we may need to put up curtains to control the flow of mud. We're probably going to need to be planting into shallow areas to try to control the resuspension of material from those shallow areas. And then hopefully we'll be able to keep the plankton and the sediment out of the water enough to get enough light to reach the bottom. We can do it, but we have to fix the water quality issue first. You can't bring seagrasses back unless we slow down the delivery of phosphorus to the system.
Great, thanks. I mean, and the incredible thing was, it just, you get that oxygen out, and especially at those high water temperatures, the fish just aren't able to survive, especially those bottom-dwelling species. So, Tiffany, I'm not going to make you get a crystal ball this time. Some questions about what are state and local county governments doing right now to protect the bay? What do you think those most important things that we're already doing are?
Well, I would say the most important thing is convening the task force, and now with a plan going forward. This was an incredible means by which the county commissioners have illustrated that they're taking this situation seriously and asked the community to put a lot of hours into determining exactly what can be done right away and over time to get this under control. So having that playbook going forward, and that was brought to the community by the county, the Board of County Commissioners. We're ready to go with some very effective means with which to recover the health of Biscayne Bay. But as I've mentioned, there are a number of things that are happening that the county is doing. The state is supporting in some ways. We would like to see more support from the state as we go forward and seek to implement a watershed restoration plan. So all around, we're ready to go with a great plan moving forward. We just need to implement it and ensure that it continues to be implemented over time.
Excellent. So I'm going to call on Steve Sauls, who's been involved in the debate, to join us in 1 second. But while he gets ready to join us to maybe talk to us a bit more about some of the political issues and some things governments are doing and might be able to do, Dr. Gardinali, heard a lot about septic systems, also about sewer systems, pipe leaks. What are a couple things just landowners near or on the bay can do to help? And then what are some things that we really need to do to improve the human waste issues to keep them from getting in the bay?
Well, there are two issues here. And so the county have had plans to upgrade infrastructure. We need to pay attention to those. And, as a citizen, you need to go and have that conversation with your elected officials. Some cities are old. There's no infrastructure that it's forever. All these things need maintenance. With sea level rise, now we need adaptation of our wastewater infrastructure. That needs to be done as well. So we could have a conversation as citizens to make sure that moves as planned. With septic tank owners, you could have something done at home to kind of reduce your footprint as well. Right? And you can look at the things that we use at home. Fertilizers are number one, is that right? But again, We do a number of other things that end up in the septic, detergents and, all kinds of, customer use products. Maybe we should start limiting some of the things that we put down the drain, or at least have a conversation with yourself. Where is this going to end up? And the answer is almost always, if you're close to the bay, anything that you put in a drain eventually is going to make it if you're not in municipal wastewater. So the nutrients are driving this thing now. But again, we need to be attentive that anything that it's put in a drain, a street, corner drainage on it's eventually connected to the groundwater, to the canal, and to the bay. So just be careful what we put in there.
Great, thank you. So it comes to the reduce, right? Less
Yes.
fertilizer, not putting it on at times when it might get washed in, and being careful what goes down the drain. So Steve, thank you for popping in to join us. With all your experience with the Bay and governments working on this issue, what do you see as the big challenges going forward and the big opportunities as well?
Well, thank you, Dean Heithaus. I appreciate being included here. I happen to live on the Bay, and what happens when you live on the Bay, you start observing things. And when it was recommended we have a summit, I said, that sounds like a great idea. And we've had 2 successful summits, and FIU has been absolutely wonderful in stepping forward to help them happen. We've been talking about the Bay being on the verge of collapse. Sometimes I think maybe I'm being too shrill or too dramatic, but now we're seeing what looks like collapse. Hopefully it's not that far along, but it's clear warning signs. Now, a lot of people, let me be clear, a lot of people have been doing a lot of good things in Biscayne Bay, including FIU, most especially including FIU. And when we were hearing from the various agencies, and a lot of Durham has been doing a lot of monitoring, and Commissioner Souza requested the septic study, and Commissioner Levine Cava has been very actively involved, and other people have been involved. But when I got pushback on the need for more water quality sampling, and my go-to advisor was Tiffany Troxler, Dr. Troxler, before we were both appointed to the task force, but she sat right next to me, and I kept saying, do we need more testing? And the answer was resoundingly yes. So when I got pushback, oh, we're doing testing, we're doing this, we're doing that, I just calmly said, because I am the public representative on the task force, okay, we're doing a lot of good things. We should celebrate that. But why is the Bay dying? So the task force took a step back, proceeded very methodically. President Rosenberg was very interested. He kept asking me, well, when are we going to get this done? It's urgent, it needs to happen. And I agree, I strongly agree. But when we push for answers, we need to get it right, because otherwise we could do some harm out there. Now, I'm happy to say our report is ready to go. It's a thoughtful report. There are lots of details in there. And let me be not remiss in saying we need a massive public information campaign. We need to involve the public schools. We need to involve the real estate community, the development community, the tourism community. Everybody has a stake in this. The good news, as Dr. Forcoran says, we can do this. We need to not be too impatient. We need not to jump for quick answers. When people were making quick statements this morning on Facebook, I reached out to FIU, I reached out to Dr. Krell. Okay, tell me what is actually going on. What do we actually know? And so having science-based decisions and having a robust presence in the Bay, I believe is critical to the future. And any task force that is appointed will also have a scientific advisory committee. And we also need community leaders, so we have a community leaders advisory committee. Now, there's lots of reasons things can't happen. My argument is that we cannot wait. We cannot wait until after the election. We need action now. And I'm very pleased to note how many elected officials and very important people who are on this call. And I want to congratulate President Rosenberg for calling it. So over 200 people now are hearing straight from FIU what FIU is doing, what the science is, and and will hopefully turn quickly to the recommendations of the task force. So we need to do this in a comprehensive way, a bipartisan way, a science-based way, and we can get this done. But it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick. First, for the patient has just rolled into the emergency room. We have to stop doing harm. We have 3,000 storm water drains flowing directly in the bay. 2 where I live. I've photographed black water flowing into the bay. I've shared it, I've reported, but it's just 1, and they're looking at it more closely, but it's 1 of 3,000. So we need to stop doing harm, and we need to have a robust plan for transitioning off septic, and we should be, in my opinion, outraged that we are having these repeated sewage spills. If I want to go swim in the ocean,
it's really important that we get the sewage pieces right. And I think that, one of the things that you mentioned that's really important is how many people want to get involved. And there is that role for everybody, because as Piero mentioned, there are things that we can all do in our daily lives to reduce what goes in there. But IK, you're out there spending lots of time on the bay, and we're getting questions about how can we get involved? Are there things that we can do? Or are there ways that people could collaborate and help increase our observations on the bay, working with you, our other scientists out there?
Yes, to be able to really solve this problem is going to take a lot of effort from different people, including, citizens, citizen scientists, and regular folks along the bay. I can recall exactly when we went out, we saw a lot of people in their boats, and they were asking us what was going on, telling us of places where they saw a lot of fish, what was happening. So there's a lot of interest in this issue because the bay affects a lot of people. And so, yes, there's opportunity for people to partake, being aware of what's going on. We talked about some of these problems with sewage, being educated on as to how some of the activities that they are doing may be impacting the bay, and how they can either stop some of these activities so that we can begin to clean up some of the environmental problems that we've had. And so it's going to really take a lot of collaborations between researchers, local agencies, and also the people who are directly affected by this. There needs to be a concerted effort to be able to treat this problem. Yes.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to jump in. Everybody stay tuned and expect to see information coming out on more ways for people to get involved. And it's a real testament to what's being done by the scientists out there, that these data are being put out there for the public to see, and it's there to be shared, and there will be opportunities to get folks involved. More questions about the algae. I think we need to hear a little bit more about the algae. Is it toxic? Do we have problems, or are we worried about toxic algal blooms? And how do we get rid of it? I mean, are there ways to remove it from the water, not just worry about the longer term nutrient issues? Jim, you want to take this one first, and maybe we'll see if Piero wants to jump in next.
I'll try. Getting rid of algae that are growing in the water is a difficult problem that people are trying to solve around the world. There are technological fixes, ways to oxidize all of the organic matter using ultraviolet light are being tried. Ozonation is being tried. So there are things that can be done, but unfortunately, if you do things to kill algae, you tend to kill everything else too. So you kill the stuff that you want as well as killing the algae. I've heard, and please don't take this as the final word, this North Bay Village plankton bloom that we have, all those brown streaks, the dominant species is something that's called Pyridinium bahamense, and it is an algae that produces a toxin, but that toxin is only transmitted to humans through a food chain. In fact, if you saw some of the pictures of the fish kills from earlier in the week, one of the main fish that was being killed were pufferfish. And pufferfish consume this algae, this pyridinium, the stuff that we have now, and then they take the toxin that pyridinium produces, and they incorporate it into their skin as a defense mechanism from being eaten. And so this species does produce toxin, but it's only a problem for humans at these concentrations, I am told, if you eat things that ate that toxin. So, and really, I know that there are probably many more things other than that one species in there, but that was identified.
Great, thank you. Piero, anything to add on the toxic algae?
I want to echo Jim's comment. There are technologies. Once we had the blue-green algae blooms north of us, the state have requested proposals for technology to eliminate it. And they're basically divided in two things. One is removing it, which is usually not very effective. But if you are at that point, you could remove it, but it's difficult. You need to filter the water pretty much. And the other one is use some oxidation treatment. And again, we could remove it, but it's not a long-term solution. So they will grow again, and you will have to do it again. And we don't know the consequences for other organisms that may live in that water. So and again, I've heard somebody saying, well, we don't want to have a Biscayne Bay that looks like an aquarium with a bubbler and a filters, all right? So we need to work on a long-term solution and be patient. So we are going to find some toxins in some of these algae, but again, we just have to be careful and wait for the science to tell us what they are, and then take action after that.
Thank you. And Tiffany, looking across the whole bay, are there patterns? Is the North Bay more polluted than the South Bay? Does it move around? Because the fish kill was primarily in the more northern parts of the bay, correct?
Yeah, that's where the reports were coming from. Yeah, there have been a number of papers on the distribution of nutrient loads, but we need updates on those publications. But yeah, it's identified that we have both nitrogen and phosphorus loading from all the canals, but with more phosphorus loading to the north and more nitrogen loading to the south. If I could just jump to a slightly different topic, I see in the Q&A here that the task force report will be taken up in the August 31st commission meeting at 9 a.m. and the public is encouraged to participate in that.
Great. Thank you very much. And the mention of toxic algae, people start wondering, is this something that we have that people have to worry about from a respiratory health perspective? Are these toxic species ones that, like the red tides, can harm humans, or is it more toxins in the water? Jim or Piero, want to take that one?
I'll only take it to say, let's wait for FWC to complete their analysis so that we know everything that's in there. None of this plankton work was work that I've done, and I've only been hearing things as scientists are generating them. So it's not time for panic, but it's time to listen. And I'm sorry, I can't answer the question any better than that, Mike. I don't know about Piero.
I will say the same thing. Once we have a full report of what Fish and Wildlife Commissioner report, then we'll have a better idea.
Excellent. And I hear that we have another person who can jump in here, Todd Crowell. I might get him to pop on as soon as he has a chance, because he's been out on the bay today and might be able to give us an update on where things stand as of today. Another concern while we wait for Todd to jump on here is, does this affect our drinking water? The challenges that Biscayne Bay has. Tiffany, want to take a stab at that one?
Well, I mean, our drinking water supply, runs through our water treatment plant. There are a number of parcels, I think, in maybe the southern part of Miami-Dade County, unincorporated Dade, that are on well water, but it's unlikely. It would be very unlikely for what's happening within the bay to influence the quality of someone's groundwater that they might be withdrawing on their properties. But most of the drinking water in Miami-Dade County goes through our water treatment plants.
Great, thank you. And I see Todd has been able to join us. So Todd, what are things looking like today? And what was the pattern between the North and South Bay through this kind of acute event that we've recently had?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Yeah, Brad Schoenhoff and I spent the majority of the day in the San Souci Canal, Little Arch Creek, and those areas where we saw those horrendous videos, and had some fascinating conversations with the landowners. I mean, everybody is coming together over this. That's a tragedy and it's a sad event, but I have never seen so much grassroots feeling about coming together. And we spent the morning talking to landowners about our homeowners along the bay about ideas about hooking up skimmers to jet skis and making sure that the canals stay clean. And when they see things flowing over, clean out the stormwater drains. Even though that's maybe not the landowner's job, it will help if the water goes through the pipes and not over the land. So I had a really interesting day. We caught a break today. It cooled down a little bit. And the wind picked up. And so actually at 10 o'clock this morning, there were quite a lot of whitecaps from wind blowing from the east to the west. So the winds that are coming with the storm are likely to help us in terms of mixing the bay. And to be honest, Brad and I think we took maybe 20 or 30 different samples throughout the north side of the bay. And what we got was pretty mixed water. That is, there was high oxygen and low algae abundances in almost every place we sampled it. So except for the very end of the canals where the stuff is sort of backing up because the wind is pushing it, things were much better in the North Bay. I'm told that as we speak, there is another big plume off the John F. Kennedy Causeway. There's a helicopter flying live and showing footage. So there's another streak of algae flowing through, but at least where we were, including Little Arch Creek and San Souci, things were much, much better, likely due to the wind.
Great, thank you very much. And there's also a question about some of the other algae out there. So there's the algae blooms in the bay, but then you also get these algal blooms with the Sargasso floating algae out kind of offshore, and at times big chunks of that comes in. Is there any potential that that's contributing to some of the challenges we're having, some of the algae coming in from outside of the bay even?
So there was a report last year that there were big clumps of sargassum that was really a big problem associated with local areas of deoxygenation. We haven't seen any sign of that in the last 10 days. Dr. Tom Frankovich Brad and I just brought about 15 samples to FIU, and he's sitting under the scope right now looking at the algae we collected. I'm hoping that he's going to text me while you're still answering questions so that we can tell everybody what the majority of the algae is. Most of the stuff we looked at on Thursday was something called a heterotrophic dinoflagella, so not all that harmful. But people just have to understand that even these little green things that produce oxygen in the day use oxygen at night. And then when they die, that's really an issue because then you get all of the bacteria and stuff. But we haven't seen anything, we haven't seen any big clumps of sargassum or anything like that while we've been out there. But Ike's been out there in the boat. I don't know if he saw anything.
Ike, seen any of the sargassum out there? Just from the oxygen as well, how do you recover from those low oxygen events? I mean, how do you go from where we were a couple days ago to better? I mean, is it once it's there's no oxygen, is there no oxygen, or can you get more back in?
Right. So one of the ways you can get oxygen back into the water is by, aeration. And that's one of the ways that Miami Dade has been trying to combat this problem, using aerators to try to introduce more oxygen into the water so that the dissolved oxygen can increase. We didn't see any algae when we went out last week. And so I can't really speak to that. But then I would also say that we need to nip this in the bud as well. And so this goes back to what I was talking about with the canals and with phosphorus especially, because phosphorus doesn't have an environmentally present gaseous phase. And so phosphorus tends to stay in the watershed or in the system, especially bound to sediments. And that can be a big problem because anything that can cause release of sediments or transport of sediments like turbulent velocities or high discharge can introduce a lot of phosphorus into the bay. So we have to also consider that as we are cleaning up the bay, we need to know that we have a lot of legacy, it's called legacy phosphorus in the canals, especially in the sediments, that when the conditions are right, such as high velocity or high discharge, we could be reintroducing some of this phosphorus as sediments into the bay. So that's one of the things you have to also watch out for and take care of.
Great, thank you so much. So just trying to be aware of time, I'm going to ask every panelist one question, and it's the same question, because we've heard a lot about the challenges of nutrient runoff, maybe needing to redo the sewer or the septic system, data needs. What is the one thing that everybody thinks that we're doing well now? And if there was one thing you had to choose that would be first in line to get something started to improve the health of the bay, what would that one thing be, whether it's individual action or government action that you think we need to do to get the bay heading in the right direction? So Dr. Forkin, we may as well go in the order that the speakers talked in first. So Dr. Forkin, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Mike. One thing we haven't talked about at all is the way that overfishing and overharvesting impacts marine ecosystems around the world. And one thing that we have going for us here is we have citizens that tend to follow the rules, and we have a really good set of very protective rules for the animals that are dependent on these seagrass meadows. So I think we're doing pretty well there. And of course, I'm going to say what we should immediately do is start improving the sewer system to stop the leaks and to add me and Dr. Gardinali and the other 150,000 people that are still on septic tanks in Dade County to a centralized sewage collection system that puts that sewage into a treatment plant, and that treatment plant then has to discharge that phosphorus waste into a place that's not going to cause ecological damage when it comes out.
Great, thank you. Piero.
I'm going to take a different approach. I already have gray hair of whatever is left. But I think we need to bring this to every classroom at every level. Because, I mean, these are the people that are going to succeed us in asking the questions and be there on the 40-year timeline where the seagrasses are going to come back. So if we don't involve, the young students and then put them online, for us, it's going to be a problem. Okay. The next one, of course, the wastewater collection. We really need to do a good job, not only at collecting septic tank wastewater, but maybe do a little bit more of advanced treatment on the systems that we have.
I think that was cheating. That was 2.
Sorry.
IK, how about you? What do you see that's good? What do you think we need to do to get it moving in the right direction?
What I think is good is how ready we were at FIU through the CREST and Institute of Environment, because we have some of the equipment that we could deploy to catch in real time and to be able to analyze what was going on. And what we can do as a graduate student, fund me, please, fund me. Give me the money to be able to do this research, to get the sensors I need to be able to make the models and give you predictions so that we can stop and clean up our bay. And South Florida, actually, so graduate student funding, hooray.
Excellent, thank you. Tiffany.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Heithaus. It's obvious that no one wants to see the bay in this condition, and that just everybody coming out to do the sampling so quickly, community organizations working to coordinate across agencies and institutions, in particular Miami Waterkeeper. So that's what we do well. We all love and appreciate the bay. And so now we just need to execute the same level of coordination and commitment to the recovery plan. And we can do that right away.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And before I turn it back over to President Rosenberg for some closing thoughts, I want to let everyone know it's my fault if we did not get to your question. We had so many good ones, but do know that we are going to answer those and we will reach out to you with the answers. So don't feel like we didn't get to it. We'll make sure you get the answers that you want. Also, I think this has been a great town hall. Thank you so much to our panelists for all of the great information. And I think we're going to have to do this again because there's a lot more to talk about. We also want everyone on this call to know that you can stay up to date with what we're doing. Look at the data that the Institute of Environment is collecting. So be involved, see what's going on, and the website is up on the screen now where you can see what you're doing, because I think you heard a common theme here. We all have a part in the solution, and the more information we have, the better we're going to be able to develop this and deploy the solutions we need to end up with a beautiful, thriving Biscayne Bay in the future. So thank you all for being here, and it is my pleasure to turn it over to President Rosenberg for closing thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Heithaus, and thank you to our colleagues, to our specialists, to our research and thought leaders on this challenge that we're well aware of. First of all, I do want to thank. I know that there are numerous elected officials on this, and we really appreciate that. We do expect to do numerous follow-ups related to the challenges that are being presented to us by the situation in Biscayne Bay, and we definitely would like to have you involved. Much has been made of the issue of this isn't the first time that Florida has been confronted with these difficulties. Tampa Bay is a really good example. And last time I looked, Tampa Bay had 3 county jurisdictions, Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Manatee. Isn't it interesting that we only have 1 county jurisdiction, and that's Miami-Dade County around our Biscayne Bay. There may be a little bit from Monroe, but by and large, it's us. Now, there are several municipal jurisdictions that have a stake in the ground. And of course, the broader tourism and the jobs of our community are very much dependent upon the health and prosperity of the greater Biscayne Bay area. So I share that guarded optimism that we can get this figured out. There's only 1 county. It's up to us. And this is doable. We can take a page out of the book of Tampa Bay. There were a lot of lessons learned. There were some mistakes made, but they're making progress. We too can make progress. We don't have to sit back and let this happen, but we do have to have a collective sense of action and urgency. And let me say that while FIU is very, very concerned about this and will continue to be engaged. There are other institutions of higher education that are working on this. We know that the University of Miami is working on this. We know that Nova Southeastern is working on this. St. Thomas, Berry, Florida Memorial, Miami-Dade College. There's more than enough to address for everybody who wants to be involved and to make a difference. So our sense of urgency is about who we are, and we're going to stay with this sense of urgency. But on the other hand, we know a broader coalition needs to be built, and that's going to require skillful leadership and an ability to keep our eyes on the prize and to get this bay repaired as quickly as we can. So thank you all very much. Obviously, there's a lot going on in our community. Everybody's got to stay safe. Keep an eye on the coronavirus, but you know, there are multiple urgencies, and our FIU is going to be there to address them. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.